and Natwar Gandhi, who was the chief financial officer of Washington, D.C. when he revived the entire. So the three of them are working with KUIDFC to help bring the green bond program to KUIDFC. So what they really plan to do is create a market and a demand for green economy, which is financially sustainable. But and they're kind of working on a very interesting model. They plan to engage 5 municipalities in the state outside of Bangalore, not Bangalore, but outside of Bangalore, because but their entry point is still the state. They're not going to the municipalities because the state raises the finance for the municipalities, but they're saying that the selection of these 5 municipalities is how they establish their credit worthiness. So they're actually building the capacity to kind of improve the credit rating, so to speak. So they're taking officials to Seoul. There is a World Bank funded project. I think the PPIF looking at setting up a credit rating academy in Seoul, and Keshav is working with the 5 municipal corporations in the state to take officials from there to build their credit worthiness, to really start to look at. So one of the key things is they're planning to. This is a 5-year program that they're working with KUIDFC. They want to build the capacity to implement these rating systems. Second is building the monitoring systems in terms of looking at it over a 5-year horizon rather than a 1 or 2 year horizon. Setting up a separate professional institution within the government that's also supported by the bank and people that KUIDFC identify to look at monitoring these 5 municipalities. And lastly, some of the key areas I think they're looking at, it's quite interesting. So these green bond program, the green bonds program, is looking at certain areas only with KUIDFC in the first 5 years. One is reducing pollution, and it's connected to the green growth. So looking at reducing your carbon emissions, making sure that you're able to better deliver your services, but the co-benefit is climate change. It's not climate change as your primary aim, because that's not a priority right now. But they're saying that the financial mechanism then becomes the incentive to also be on a path of sustainability while you improve your service delivery. So one of the things is looking at improved urban design, sustainable land use planning, investments in green infrastructure, looking at impact fees and higher floor area ratios, which again reduce the infrastructure, which increase infrastructure requirements, but also reduce the carbon emissions if people are taking sustainable modes of transport to get to the higher density areas. Reclamation, restoration of degraded industrial sites, public transport and non-motorized projects, solid waste management. Bangalore's again, in some ways, the waste problem that we had was a good problem because we found a window to get away from the garbage mafia, and the city realized that they can actually manage themselves rather than be at the beck and call of the garbage mafia, who were literally holding the city ransom. And another area is slum improvement and how do you regularize slum lands. And lastly, I think quite interesting is policy incentives to business and industry to align production of these businesses to green performance standards. So also looking at building efficiencies, looking at green power market development groups. So this is an idea floated by the World Resources Institute, and we're getting a tremendous amount of response of creating a market for buying green power. If you create the market, then there are enough people to produce the green power. But the challenge is to collectively bargain as a market alliance of 5 or 6 big corporates who collectively buy green power. Therefore, your cost per unit starts to come down. So there's quite an interesting model. So I hope I didn't take too much time, but thank you again for having me here, and be open to any questions. Thank you.
Thank you for particularly that green bond concept. I look forward to follow it up. I think all 4 speakers have made very important points here, and we all have learned a lot, as much as the 3rd session. I must say this. And now we're open for discussion. We have about 15 minutes, 10, 15 minutes. Please, Roy. You want the speaker?
Let me ask a question of Johannes and others. We're stuck on the property tax. We're stuck in India and we're stuck everywhere in low-income countries, and everyone keeps looking for some kind of breakthrough. What do you think about the possibility that that a country could unify the administration, meaning identification and valuation, of all land-based taxes?
In Colombia, they actually had the National Cadastral Agency that was responsible for all but Bogota. And it was interesting, when we worked there 30 years ago, and everything was still basically handwritten ledgers in Bogota, the national agency actually was already ahead. Now, I don't know how the situation is today, but I always felt it was bizarre that Bogota had its own system for the cadastral side. And I think it's, if anything, with modern technology. Now, you can maybe make both cases. Decentralization is easier because everybody can manage the technology now, but you can probably also argue that unification at the national level with modern technology has its advantages. So I think in principle it's a good idea. In part it goes back to your question of decentralization. To the extent you want to perhaps have different administrations at the local level, in terms of even the methodology that you use. How far do you go down that road? I don't know. It's to some extent a political decision. But if you overcome the sense that the definition and the methodology of appraisal has to be, if you think it doesn't have to be differentiated, or shouldn't be, there shouldn't be an allowance for potential differentiation across jurisdiction, then there's no reason not to centralize. So yeah, I think that might help.
Also when there is different degrees of commitment in different state governments, there are some states which are way ahead. Some cities, why would Bangalore want to sign up to something which is centralized, GIS-based, let's say, where they know that left to themselves, they can push ahead much more. And in fact, not so much in GIS, but for general e-governance, there is this whole big project from NIC, National Information Center. And when you talk to them here, when you talk to the ministry, which is responsible for that, they would really make you believe that they're doing this fantastic work of building e-districts, and you talk to them, and when you go back, what you find is that only in states where they've understood the importance of back-end integration, in that case, in this case, updating your registers to match with the GIS, only there it's going to help. Otherwise, it becomes a fad that everyone says we are signing up for a central program, and everybody puts some sort of, in the case of e-governance, computers on their desk, and they register the grievance electronically, then everything else is on foot. So you can imagine the similar thing for GIS-based a way of trying to get the property database. So there is a problem on centralization. In fact, our only hope is to see Bangalore march ahead big time and Hyderabad following, now I don't know with what they've done, close by. And, you see that difference when you travel around the country.
Anything else?
I would agree with Ishar. I don't think a central thing will work out here. And also the states will see that the central government is trying to muscle into what they see as their territory. I think the way out is city competitiveness. That is one city versus another city, and that drives each other to excel over the other. I think and there's reason to hope. We earlier had this trying to sell the India story, that was phase one. The second story was trying to sell the state story, which is the current version. The third phase of that is really going to be city story. And that's the stage when it'll really take off. That's what I think.
We are involved in digitization of the land records in one of the states. And our own feeling was that it's a wasteful duplication of effort, state by state. And a lot of economies of scale in digitization, if it can be done, and the benefits of unification of that system. And I don't really see much political resistance in following a standard program on a pan-India basis. All you require is some degree of leadership by people. And a good example is the GST. Under GST, they are creating a uniform single platform for administration of GST across all the states and the center. And in spite of a lot of resistance about the design of GST, all of the states have unanimously endorsed creation of a special purpose vehicle for that purpose. So I have a feeling that rather than waiting for intercity competition, if center shows a leadership, and they can show the leadership in the form of saying, we'll fund it.
Nobody's taking it up.
Just share another example. A decade ago, we pushed for an idea called BASIC, Bangalore Spatial Information Center. But it's amazing, at a city level, we have different agencies having their own base maps. So that's the kind of challenge that we are battling. Here we are talking about some kind of a harmonized national system. So I have the BBMP having its base map and the water board for the same city. They're not able to agree on, so that's the kind of challenges.
Yeah,
So-
but I mean, to take up from what he said, right,
Speak.
the whole system doesn't have to be standardized nationally, but the base, the common elements, the common elements can be, because the common elements are standardized nationally, and then the way each city or each state then interpret it and take it forward and build on it, that is their local initiative. Because unless we do that, we will always remain a hodgepodge, and you will never be able to create an information system on land if you do not have a common base. I mean, I've not done work in this, but taking from what he said, I kind of see the point in what a national system would be.
I'm not disagreeing with that in principle, but first what I'm telling you is that if you talk to the Government of India and Planning Commission people, they will say this has been a major thrust area for 10 years. And it hasn't happened. So you want the states and cities to wait. It's much better for some of them to demonstrate. And so I think given our conditions, this is my view, I'm not disagreeing with the principle of it, but it's not likely to work from the top.
No, I see your skepticism, but and it's not very deep, and it's right there. But what I meant is, Indian governments and state governments do work on a system of on guidelines, etc. So I think at the national level, if you can establish a set of broad guidelines, not very detailed, not very down to the right last nut and bolt, but overall, what is the right and then the states pick it up and drill down, and their own revenue systems may be different from each other, and so therefore customize it for the state and then for the city.
Oh, yes, please.
Question actually for Rajiv. This is a very interesting presentation. Thank you. I have two questions. One, you know our macro situation. So when we talk about leveraging public finances, using them to leverage money, it can't come from central public finances, because those are essentially spent on consumption now. The center is not an investing agency anymore. So it's possible it would happen with state governments, because state governments now run a revenue surplus, so they are investing to the extent they run a fiscal deficit. So that money can be used. At the moment, that money is being used for essentially for irrigation, with very little payback. Now, that's one alternative. The other is we are thinking of expenditure switching, where we stop doing stuff like JNURM and use that money instead to leverage in finance. I'd like your view on, either or both, or what you think in terms of the specific